Hello, Cyrus.
Hey, Juanita, how are you?
I am good. How are you?
I'm managing in these days of turmoil, crisis, panic, and all of the above.
Are you just managing a flicker of hope, a flicker of silver lining there?
There always is. There always is. I think the main thing is, I'm with a loved one, which is fantastic. Not everybody has that. So I think, I look at them and I say, that's an absolute blessing.
That's awesome. So, today we are going to talk about something I know pretty much nothing about. I know business really well, having been in business for years, running my own company, business advice, etc., etc. But whenever you and I have spoken, I always tend to talk a lot less because it tends to be about either sport or movies or entertainment, stuff that you are really passionate about and that you
I
translate
am,
lessons from into economics and into business. So my
yeah.
question for you today is then, especially in from a business leader or a business owner point of view, how do you play the long game? How do sports stars specifically manage to have
Okay.
long careers rather than just brilliant flashes in the pan?
Yeah, and it's interesting. I mean, okay, obviously, just to go back on what you were talking about in terms of our conversations. Yes, I try not to, but I always slip into the comfort zones.
It's
But
always
I think,
fascinating. It's always entertaining.
yeah,
Don't worry. I love it. I love it. I learn a lot. Stuff I don't understand,
thank
but I
you.
learn a lot.
Thank But it's an interesting thing because I think sports stars, sports organizations, we have to understand that every single one of these entities, be it people or the organizations and franchises, are actually businesses.
Yeah.
So when you look at, like, let's take for instance LeBron James, right? LeBron James, basketball star, plays for the Los Angeles Lakers at the moment. He's 35 years old. He turned 35 in December. Now he's been playing basketball since he was, well, professionally since he was 18. He went drafted from high school into the NBA. Now, that doesn't happen for a lot of people. And for him, it was an incredible thing. He was called the phenom when he started out. So one of the incredible things was that business understood what they had coming out of high school. A 17, turning 18-year-old was a marketing star. They had somebody they could hitch their trailer to and say, you go for it. Let's see where your career goes. And LeBron James, one of his first feats, if you can imagine this, if you just think back to when you were 18, they gave him $1 million contract. Coca-Cola gave him $1 million contract. Said to him,
Wow.
look, this is your endorsement. You're able to accept it now. Go for it. And from there, he's managed to build a brand that is massive. So what he's then done is that he's managed to stay on the court and been unbelievably productive, more productive than most sports stars have been in half that time. I think this is his 19th season in the league, and it's just incredible. So
And
I'll use
productive,
him as,
productive in terms
okay,
of being on the court, remaining in the
exactly,
game, or
exactly.
productive in the brand part that you mentioned.
It's both. He is phenomenal. So when you look at LeBron James as a case study, and I'll start with there. Let's start on the court. The amount of points you score in the position that he plays, he's a small forward, is actually quite important, and he's become integral to all the teams that he's played on. So there's a stat that is phenomenal about LeBron that I'll use now.
Mhm.
Last season was the first season in almost 10 years where he wasn't in the NBA Finals.
Mhm.
This is incredible because the amount of winning you have to do in an 82-game regular season is crazy. Then you go into what they have called the playoffs, and you've got to beat every single team on your way to get to the final itself. We're not saying he won every single one of those finals, but to get there, he was on a 9-year-in-a-row streak. It's incredible. And the point scoring, the rebounding, the assisting. So all of those numbers are just off the charts. Now, let's look at him as a business person and as a brand person.
Mhm.
One of the key things he did towards the sort of, I suppose, latter part of his career, he's still playing and playing at a very high level at the moment, is that he then moved from Cleveland, which is not known for being a metropolis of incredible business activities, and moved to Los Angeles, where he plays at the Lakers. One of the things that he did was he started a production company called Spring Hill Productions. They do movies, they do series, they do web series, they do all sorts of stuff. He also took on board the idea that the more you give and the more you spread the love, the more people benefit, and then they can do the same. So he made one of his closest friends his business advisor, not because he was a friend, but because he saw the potential in the guy. And it's unreal what they've managed to build together, because this friend of his was able to then start up a agency where he now represents other athletes, does a lot of their business ventures. So he's not just dealing with contracts and stuff like that, but looking at how they can invest their money as they grow. Sports people rather, are really well known for losing all of their money. You look at the Mike Tysons.
Yes.
It's crazy. It's crazy. And it's one of the saddest things. Can you imagine having nothing? Then you work your way up to earning hundreds of millions of dollars, only to go back to having nothing, all because of bad decision making. And it happens so frequently that there's so ESPN, the sports channel, do a series called 30 for 30, where they do documentaries on different things, and one of them is called Broke. It is fascinating because they talk to sports stars who've gone broke, and these are people who've made the big time. Played in the NFL, the Gridiron American Football League, played in Major League Baseball, NBA, primarily all American sports stars. And I think the stat is something like 65 to 70% of professional athletes go broke within 5 years of finishing their careers. These are people who are earning in excess of $1 million to $2 million a year.
So what are the decisions that they made that made them go broke, and how do we take that? There's two things. You say LeBron James has been on a 9-year streak.
Yeah.
You know, a streak is usually shorter. Surely a 9-year streak is not by chance. It's not just because he was good. Surely he did a few things that guaranteed that 9-year streak. And surely the others that gained everything and lost everything made decisions that made that happen to them.
Yeah.
Is that as clear cut as that, or is it more complex?
It is very complex. There are certain things you can boil down to pure decision making, like, for instance, stars who've gone broke, often attributed to the lifestyle issues. So what they have often said is there's a crazy attitude of keeping up with the Joneses, primarily in the US, and also about living a false lifestyle. So, for instance, you'll see people driving the most expensive cars and living in the biggest houses that they can. What they are not doing in those instances is actually owning those houses wholesale. They often rent, or in some cases, just don't ever pay it off. They just purchase the property on bad terms, and then by the time they don't have any more money left, have to relinquish those to the bank or are forced to sell them. Same with the cars. There's a lot of leasehold cars that happen in the US. People don't buy them outright because of the way it's structured. The automotive business is structured in the US. So people get caught up in those kinds of things. To go to LeBron James's longevity and whether or not that is a decision-based stuff, there was an article that came out fairly recently that is also fascinating about him. LeBron James is reported to spend about $1.5 million a year on his body, on maintaining his physical, just his shape.
We're talking spa and hair and nails now, right? So it's a reason for me to go to the spa. That's what you're saying. Not quite.
If anything, it could be the excuse you could use, because in essence, it's about maintaining yourself. But the thing is that money really, if you look at it, can be extrapolated into quite a few different things. So it can be his gym and the gym equipment, updating that stuff often, the trainers that he uses. So you'll have different biokineticists, dietitians, you'll have people who are massage therapists, because a lot of these guys know that you don't want your body to break down. And especially not at the rate that it often does. Basketball is a high impact sport. So to have a long running career is really, really something, especially when people have major injuries on the turn of just trying to do a pass or, a dunk or something like that. You can twist your ankle really badly, just walking down the street. It happens to some of us. And so maintaining your body and your physical aspect is really it. Then diet, and all of that. Can you imagine spending 100, what are we saying?
1.5 million.
1.5 million US dollars. I mean, it's crazy. It's crazy. Yet there are results. Now, not everybody can do that. So
no. Imagine if you were able to spend $150 million. But then once again, our bodies, we often see, and that might be a mistake we make as business owners, business leaders often is, our bodies are not a piece of equipment. Our bodies should just come along. So, a lesson that I'm making for, note I'm making for myself. If LeBron James spends that because he sees his body as a piece of equipment, then maybe there's some value in that as well from a business point of view, even if your main activity is, typing faster or slower.
Exactly. But then you'll also find, so there's always, isn't there the 5 o'clock club, 5 in the morning club, where there's a lot of business people who say that they start their day at 5 in the morning and, it gives them a lot more time to be more productive. But in order to be able to handle waking up at 5 in the morning, you've got to do a heck of a lot before, making sure you're not drinking yourself to a stupor, or, so diet and alcohol consumption and exercise and all of that stuff plays a part. And I think that's some of the stuff that you can actually learn from the sports stars exactly. Because what LeBron does there translates to some other people. Okay, so I'll go a little bit away from LeBron because we're talking about longevity here. And from a soccer perspective, a football perspective, Ryan Giggs, who used to play for Manchester United, he is also another incredible case study because he played at the, absolute top of the game till he was about 40. He retired when he was 40. And one of the things
that's old for a sports star, yes?
It is pretty old. I'll give you another example now of somebody who's even crazier. But it is old for a sports star, especially at a top level, because in essence, when you think about it, like a LeBron James or Ryan Giggs, there are always new, younger players coming every year. And there's only so many spots in a team. So for instance, in a basketball team, you've got I think it's about, call it 24, 26 places within a squad. Football teams also about maybe 18, 21. It depends as to, the regulations per country. And what sporting organization doesn't want a fitter, younger, person running up and down? They have more energy, they have more drive, they're getting up and down, and they're generally more malleable. So to have that longevity is also about showing your worth to the organization itself. They have to see why it's important to keep you on board. Now, LeBron James is a mega star, and he could go anywhere in the world on a basketball perspective. But when you look at it, any organization does exactly the same things. Hire young, make sure that you can train them up. They cost a little less, but they are able to do more, so you can extract more hours from them. Sometimes organizations also then realize that, perhaps you have to then invest in your mature staff because they have know-how, capabilities. There are certain things that they've learned about the business that have, you don't want to lose those kinds of things. So there's always this balancing act that happens. But I often try to counsel people to say, just make sure you don't toss the older people aside because you think, well, the young ones are going to take you forward. It's not always as easy as saying, youth will drive us. And there's almost a weird link to the sort of Corona days we're living in now, where people are like, the oldies, you've had your time. It's a little insane that way. So
very much insane, because there's a lot of institutional knowledge and a lot of wisdom that is settled in this group, and it's a different way, in a different format, a different speed to access that. But I've learned that, where I get stuck or where I need to move a little bit, it's not in my peer group. It's in those that have done differently than me and that are accessible in different ways than me at a different speed. And it's then up to me to go and access that wisdom in a compassionate and completely different way that might be frustrating, but is incredibly valuable every single time.
Exactly. And so let's go back to the Ryan Giggs example, right? The reason I brought him up was he was asked how has he managed to maintain his body at 40, being able to run up and down the pitch. He's not at the same speed. And he said he turned to yoga. And it was an absolute mind shift for a lot of people, where they were like, yoga, really?
Yeah,
and he said,
yoga.
It makes you more supple. It works the muscle groups without ever putting the types of pressure you get from your more explosive exercises. So he felt that was one of the key things. What happens after that? More sports people start doing yoga. And before you know it, it actually starts, you're seeing the results in limiting the amount of injuries people get, that sort of thing. So with yoga comes diet. And this is also something that's really interesting from a football perspective. So Arsene Wenger, who used to manage Arsenal Football Club in England, came to Arsenal from Japan. He'd been managing there. And he'd had limited success as a player in France, and then more so as a manager in France before moving to Japan. But one of the things that happened when he moved to England was that he went to Arsenal, which was a very established club, played in the, what is the Premier League now, and had a weird culture about it. So, I mean, okay, so you're not necessarily a football fan, but I'll give you a little bit of the history behind it.
Start from the basics, Cyrus. Start from the basics.
Arsenal Football Club was known as having a very big drinking culture.
Okay.
Drinking being a very interesting, part of British society. They had quite a few players who had drinking problems, binging at the pub, that sort of thing. When Wenger arrived at the club, I can't remember the exact year, I think it would have been about maybe 1996, 97, he made wholesale changes at the club. One of the key things he did was he completely changed the menu at the club. So pasta was taken off let's start with chips, no sauces, no drinking,
he must
no
have
chocolate.
Been popular.
You can imagine the revolt that happened.
Yes.
I mean, people were like, what is going on? And obviously footballers don't live in isolation. So you can imagine they're telling other people, in other teams, can you imagine this guy's come here? He's taken away our chips, our French fries, we can't eat fried foods. And then you started seeing that their diet changed, and they were eating pastas, but it was, better made ones. They were eating fewer carbs and controlled portions. And all of a sudden you started seeing results on the pitch. And then the guys suddenly had more energy. They were able to, exercise for longer in training, which then meant that they got better physically, individually. And then as a team, they had far greater fitness and were able to then achieve stuff. And he really revolutionized football at their club. What that did was that it had a knock-on effect for other football clubs where they were like, did you see what they're doing at Arsenal? Maybe we can do the same.
Yeah.
And so you see that the inherent knock-on effect is that people will see what is successful for you and will try to mimic, copy, or try to adhere to those things. So change happens organically because people make decisions around what are the most important things for them. For Arsene Wenger, he realized that one of the key things around Arsenal was he wanted to make them a club that was able to do things on the pitch other teams weren't able to.
I just want to pause you there because it's incredibly valuable what you said. We need to make choices based on what is important for us. And Arsene Wenger, yes, he didn't see football and success and the most games and the best players and the most salaries. He didn't see that as what was important to him.
No.
He created something different. He said he wanted to do different, and that was important to him, not the regular thing. Yeah. And it's hard. It's incredibly hard, talking from experience here, to figure out what is important to you in the simplest terms. Not what it is you do and how well you should be doing it, but what at the core is really important to you, and using that as a starting point.
What defines you? What defines your organization? And I think this is one of the most important things from a business perspective. We are not seeing what defines an organization, from top to bottom. So if you mention certain brands, people will say, okay, fine, KFC, finger licking good. You understand what that means in terms of the slogan, but what does that mean for the organization? And that means a hearty food culture, right? And I've done a little bit of work with KFC in the past, and this is something that they try to build. Is when you have a good culture around your people, and you try to build an environment where the staff are happy to be where they are, doing tasks that aren't necessarily the most mind-blowing, but they're happy to do those, makes you realize that you've built a culture. So it's really about culture building, at the end of the day. And this is what Arsene Wenger did, was that he didn't just build a culture, he built a healthy culture. This is the same thing with LeBron James. You don't have to build a body, you have to build a healthy body. There's a Japanese footballer. Not a lot of people know his name, so I'll read it out. Yes, Kazuyoshi Miura. Okay. Now, Kazuyoshi Miura is not a global star, but he is one of the most important people in sports at the moment, because Kazuyoshi Miura started his last football game. He's still relatively active. It's just that obviously all sports have been suspended at the age of 52.
He what?
Yeah.
He
So he's
started.
playing in Japan, playing in the J League. He had a start in April last year at the age of 52. He's been sort of doing yearly contracts, and he's phenomenal. Now, is he the world's greatest? No, not really. Has he ever really hit the dizzying heights of winning the European Champions League and that sort of things? No, not at all. He's had a sort of a storied career in terms of going to different teams and that sort of stuff. But really, his whole thing was trying to eke out as much joy from the game as possible. He kept playing because he loved it, and he
That's
was
so
able to contribute.
cool.
So, there's no reason why you can't do this stuff if you also have an organization that backs you. Some people would have said at the age of 40, Mr. Miura, you've served your purpose, you can go. So, if we're looking at sort of retirement ages here, like, can you imagine what that would be like? They say in dog years, like, so in real world of work years, what is 52 years old when you look at the sporting context?
Absolutely.
So, in essence, in real world of work years, he'd probably be mid-70s and still contributing to an organization, not necessarily having moved off the playing field into the boardroom, which is often the move that a lot of people see, but saying, hey, I can still, hang out here with these youngsters, show them a thing or two.
How did he get that done, though? Was it, obviously he decided and he applied, but what did that look like? Because in my mind, the little I know about the business side of sport, lots of policies, lots of regulation, lots of culture, lots of guidelines, lots of preconceived ideas. So what needed to shift in the club or in the system, in the framework for him to be able to get a start in 52? Surely this was, not necessarily bribery and corruption and him forcing his way in there, but what had to shift for him to say, well, I've got this, and for there to be a space created for him?
I think the thing here really about him is that it was more about what happens in terms of how the club views him. So he's not necessarily seen as a mascot, but he is an emblem of what it represents. It's about family. And at the end of the day, you don't just, move grandpa to the scrap heap. He isn't necessarily grandpa, but it's that family thing. I mean, you get me though, right?
I do. So they also started with their thing, and what was most important for them was family, and this emblem of being the grandfather. 52 is way not old, but the emblem of being the grandfather connected to their most importantly held value that created a space for both them and him to make this thing that is extraordinary in the world.
Yeah. And I think it comes down to an investment in people. So more than anything, a club or organization has to say, what do we see in this person that is important to us? What is the value of this person? And do they espouse the values that we hold high? So in my talk, Leading the Winner's Circle, I talk about that kind of stuff a lot.
Yeah. You also said a little bit earlier that it is about the longevity or long career as a sports star is also about showing your value to the organization. Now, in many cultures, and if we look at stereotypes and heretics and so on, some groups in society aren't promoted from a young age to show their value, to show their worth, to have confidence in who they are, but to find their confidence in being second or in serving others, not necessarily, stepping into the boardroom saying, here I am fabulous, this is my value. What have you learned from sports, from showing your value to the organization that we can take into our lives as employers, employees, etc.?
There's so many lessons, and I think there's a lot to be garnered from how you view your business and the business of what you do. You see, there are a lot of teams, like for instance, and I'm a big football fan, so I always try to revert to that. But somebody like Lionel Messi, the Argentine footballer who plays for Barcelona, one of the world's biggest stars, Messi really is just is incredible. He broke into the Barcelona first team at about the age of 16 years old. And there are a lot of stories of people doing that. Pele did something similar. I think Pele played for Brazil at the age of 15.
What?
And so there's an old adage that goes that if you're good enough, you're old enough.
Okay.
I believe it might have been Matt Busby, the Manchester United former Manchester United manager in the sort of 1950s, who said that. Could be wrong. It could have been Bob Paisley at Liverpool. But the whole thing is being able to see the value in somebody and say, I trust in you to do the things I've seen you do. Don't worry about any of the other bigger picture stuff. Do what you have to do. And that's something that a lot of organizations do not do. They often say, okay, fine, you're an intern. What we need you to do is stay in your lane, go and get the teas and coffees, transcribe these notes, do this. If somebody comes to you with an idea, take it on board, because oftentimes they're thinking of your business in a way you haven't. And this is the kind of stuff that you can learn from sports stars, because Messi might not have worked at another team where they would have been like 15, even age alone, we're not going to put him in the team. They were a club that were willing to see the talent and say, we have to ride this lightning in a bottle and see where it takes us. Now we fast forward to, he's the age of, I think he's 30, 31 now. Messi has broken absolutely every record there is to break at Barcelona. Goals scored, assists, how many games he's played. He is phenomenal. He has become that organization. It is almost impossible to separate the two. Pele, the same with Brazil. And Pele's story is also, it's incredibly fascinating, because having made his national team debut at the age of about 15, I think he scored his first national team goal at the age of 16, went on to score 1,000 goals in his career, which is an unreal statistic. But
I'll take your word for it.
Oh, it's please do. But the thing about Pele that doesn't get spoken about enough is his importance to Brazilian society. So what happened was, I mean, we understand football is a business, and so you'd expect Pele went to go and play for Real Madrid, Barcelona, all of those. He didn't get the chance to play outside Brazil in his prime, because the Brazilian government declared him a national treasure.
Because he was so good, or because he was so different?
He was so good and so important to the fabric of Brazilian culture that whenever he played, the Maracanã Stadium, which seats about 100,000 people, was full every single weekend. It's never happened since. It probably won't ever happen again because of obviously legal labor laws and that sort of thing. He did eventually go on to play in America, and when they started trying to roll out soccer in their leagues in the sort of 80s, at that stage I think he was also sort of early 40s, and it didn't really pan out. It was more like a sojourn at the end of his career, like, oh, I'm just fawning off to the States. But it's an incredible thing, because this is what value is. When a nation can actually say, you know what, we are not going to allow this man to go because he means too much to us to just be playing in Spain or in Italy or in England. He has to stay here. It says a heck of a lot. It's
also about them showing up. Sorry, Cyrus. It's also about them showing up. I mean, Messi, if he had in his, Messi and Pele, right?
Yeah.
If they had in their minds that, I don't know if I'm good enough. I don't know if I'll be good enough. I think I'm not old enough. Maybe I should wait 2 more years, or I should be more sure. Or maybe they've had family and friends close to them that said, well, look at the stats, look at the markets, look at the tradition, look at the culture. Just not. If they didn't have that confidence to put themselves out there and say, well, I don't know the extent of my value, but I do know there's something. Let me take a chance. Let me take that risk. Let me put it out there and let me try. They never would have become these national and international icons that they are today.
The support structures are the critical things here. What they do at the Barcelona Academy, La Masia, is that they try to build athletes from the ground up. And Messi actually had an issue with the growth hormones that he produced naturally. So at some point, he was being given growth hormone to try and get taller and bigger. I think he's only like 5'6", 5'7". Now, and this is after having taken those growth hormone injections and stuff. So, you can imagine, but the thing was that the club was able to invest in him and in his family and say, look, we want to be able to build something around you. Sport is a very fickle business. Once you get injured, you can often get forgotten about. There are so many stories of players who didn't manage to reach their prime or earn what they could have if they had stayed fit. And that's why I brought up LeBron James, because there are people who there's a basketball player called Grant Hill. And he sort of came up as a youngster in the NBA. I think he was also about 19, 20. He played some college basketball and came in the sort of mid-90s when Michael Jordan was still doing his thing. He was seen as the heir apparent. And he then suffered some horrific injuries to his ankles and I think, Achilles, and there was problems around that. There was one point where Sprite realized, okay, Grant Hill's going to be our guy. So there was a campaign that they launched, and people still ask him this question now because the ad campaign was these kids watching him training by himself. And then when he finished his training, he goes and he drinks a Sprite. And everyone's like, Grant Hill drinks Sprite? Grant Hill drinks Sprite. Just that skyrocketed Sprite as a brand. They had made sure they were with the right star at the right time with a campaign that didn't even say drink Sprite to become a better athlete. It just said, Grant Hill drinks it. That was enough. Then his injuries hit and it curtailed his career horribly. Obviously, his earning potential went down and he didn't make as much as he could have if he had been going on that trajectory. The Kobe Bryant of this world, who, his tragic death recently in a helicopter crash is just astounding. But he was starting to make that shift that LeBron was doing from going from on the court stuff to what happens off the court. And he had a production company where they were rolling out a whole bunch of stuff. He had his off the court issues as well, some very serious ones in the courts of law. But when you look at the example that he took in terms of the single-mindedness, the focus that he had on court and how he used that in a business sense is phenomenal. He talks about what Mamba mentality, being ultra-focused like a black Mamba. Dangerous when you need to be, but also aware, surveying the situation, that sort of stuff. It's an incredible ethos to look at. And not many businesses are able to say, oh yeah, we're going to act like Mambas. I mean, I don't know how that looks in a boardroom.
No, you just show up and, you get the products made, you get the service out, the sales team go, you've got your weekly meeting, you've got the monthly management meeting, it's so routine based that what I'm hearing at the moment is in trying for me to figure out what can we learn from sports stars, specifically in how to have a long career, even though the pressure is on to get you out as soon as possible and anything can go wrong, is that it is about this laser focus. It is about the knowing more than what you do, knowing why you do it, and staying connected to that why and finding different ways outside of the obvious, outside of the going to the court or the football field to still activate that what is important to me and stepping into that role and figuring out how to keep on doing it, but also doing that proactively. It seems to me as if there's a correlation between those that reacted to the money that was coming in and spent reactively, and those that were saying, I understand the game I am playing, the bigger game of business combined with sports. I understand that I need to be awesome in both. I need to work in my business, play the sport, be the sports star, and on my business, and understand that by the time I hit 40 or 52, that's it, that's quits, that's over. And I need to create something for myself with what I've got now.
So you're dead right, because that's exactly it. It's about focus, but it's also about a determination of sorts, So one of the things that I talk about in Leading in the Winner's Circle is a word I always use, perspicacity, which is a shrewd mental perception. And people always love it. They're like, I've never heard this word before.
What? Perspicacity. I'm trying to break it down, but I don't have notepad and pen now. So I don't know. Where does it come from? What is it? What?
Look, everything derives its origins from Latin, but really it just means keen mental perception, or being able to see things shrewdly, and that's really talking about looking ahead, planning, visualizing. So it's those key things, being able to also visualize what your success is. Now, the average sports career, depending on what you play, can go from as little as 5 to 6 years to as long as 20 years in some cases, depending on the impact that your body takes. Rugby careers, and those who are in high impact sports like American football, are generally about 5 to 6 years at the very top. Like, there are people who extend their careers, also depending on position you play, that sort of thing, to like 10 or 11 years. But the reality is that if you only worked and you had your highest earning potential for 5 or 6 years, how are you going to make the most of your money that way? That is a critical thought for a lot of people to take into consideration. The problem we have, and a lot of sports stars face, is that when you're in the midst of it, you are riding that high and that wave. And so you need to have a support structure around you where people say, think about what's coming after. It doesn't always happen, and our businesses are the same. When the profits are soaring through the roof, or productivity is at an all-time high, it cannot get better than this, and we just keep trying to push that
And you
without
go out
saying
on the sun deck and have a little tequila and a little sun ring and go, it's so easy making money. Nothing needs to change. Nothing's coming from us. We can just relax. And I'm assuming that that's where it starts going wrong. Oh, no. I know in business that's when it starts going wrong. But in sports?
It's exactly the same. It's exactly the same. And so it's interesting to see how, as technology changes and as we become more connected, there are a lot more people who are understanding the connection between business and sport, and also bringing them together. So there's basketball. I'm a little obsessed with it, but what they do, just a touch. But what they're doing in the States is really fascinating, because you're seeing, let's take, for instance, the Golden State Warriors. They are an organization who I support them. So I'm getting that out of the open. Yes, I'm a Golden State Warrior supporter. Judge me for it or not. But they, as an organization, did a lot of very interesting things. So they're based in, they call it the Bay Area, San Francisco. They've just moved to a new stadium in San Francisco. They were based in Oakland, in the sort of greater San Francisco area. And they were known as a franchise who wouldn't do much, wouldn't be much. They didn't have the sports stars. They didn't really have the money or any of that stuff. They had one or two cult heroes who the fans of the team loved, and everybody else in the NBA were like, that guy's good, or that guy's good. Then they came under new ownership, I think about maybe, let's call it 10 years ago. Two guys who'd worked in the tech industry decided they were going to take the team over, and they'd purchase it, and they'd start changing the culture of the organization. So, to give you a little bit of a very broad brushstrokes thing on how basketball works, so what they do is they have this thing called the NBA draft, where college players choose to go and try and play professionally after at least a year of playing in college. There's a whole rules and regulations about that. But anyway, and what happens is that, so the draft basically is teams get to enter a lottery of sorts. But the lottery is fixed in a way where the teams who are the worst performers get given the opportunity to have the first picks. So it's about trying to level the playing fields.
Wow.
So you don't just have teams who have all these stars and they are star laden, and then they just get the best youngsters coming out of college. Because that's often what happens in any way, business.
How often
if you
is
find
the draft? Is it an annual thing, or is it
every year? Every year.
So it's every year, irrespective of what you've done. There's this great equalizer.
This is what it's supposed to be, but as is business, everything's changed. So what happens is that so let's say you get a pick. Let's say you are the Golden State Warriors and you finished rock bottom. What you then enter is what they call the draft lottery, which basically says that the sort of, I think it's the seven worst teams enter a sort of lottery with, the bouncing balls, and then they try to pick the team from there. But the team with the worst stats gets more balls put into the thing, so you have a higher chance of getting that number one pick. Because the number one pick really is what you want. You get to choose potentially a star like a LeBron James who can change the face of your entire franchise, which means earnings through the gate, TV money, all of that stuff. There's actually a kid who's just come on the scene now called Zion Williamson, who it looks like he could be the new LeBron James. And he's gone to a team called the New Orleans Pelicans. Now their viewership numbers through the roof when he got fit. Anyway, so the Warriors were known as a team who were really bad. They managed to get a couple of relatively high draft picks, but they picked well. Mm-hmm. And what they did was they got three very interesting picks in the draft over, I think it would be a course of about maybe 4 seasons. And then you allowed those guys to grow at the club. One was Stephen Curry, who went on to become and is now one of the greatest three-point shooters in NBA history. Mm-hmm. The other one is a guy called Klay Thompson, who also has become one of the greatest three-point shooters in NBA history, and a guy called Draymond Green, who was picked really low down, but became one of the best defenders that has ever played the game because he's very street smart. They hitched their wagon to these guys and have now gone on to win 3 championships in 6 years. This is the team that hadn't won a championship for 50 years, up until doing it again in 2015.
Just because they have the right people, and just because those people got there by chance. So no strategy, no nothing, great equalizer, and using that equalizer and understanding who to hitch your wagon to. I love that term that you keep on referring to, hitch your wagon. Who in your organization do you hitch your wagon to? Yeah, and what happened then?
So it's interesting because their strategy was, we've gotten these draft picks before and they've never panned out because we've picked poorly. What we need to do is try and find people that work to a system that we think we're going to play towards. So having a coach in place that works within what you believe your framework is. So American sports work off, you'll have your team ownership, who pay for everything, right? And then below them is a sort of team president. This is NBA, NFL, MLB, NHL. Mm-hmm. Then you have your general manager, who then basically sees to player movements, what's happening with the playing staff, as well as the coaching staff. Then you have your coaches below them, and then they have their assistant coaches, then the players, and blah, 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 blah. Now, what Joe Lacob and I think it's Jacob Evans have done, or not Jacob Evans, but what Joe Lacob has done at the Warriors is that he managed to put in place a really, really interesting general manager who was also quite young. And they looked at trying to change the way basketball was played, because they also saw how the stats worked in terms of three-point shooting. They managed to find and hold on to a player like Steph Curry, who ended up winning 2 Most Valuable Player of the Year awards, one of them which is voted for unanimously. It's the first time ever that ever happened. But they basically changed basketball, because when the three-point line was introduced into the NBA in the sort of 1980s, it was seen as a gimmick shot, and people didn't really focus on it. Basketball was played by massive guys who played near the basket and would dunk all over people, and the bigger you were, the better you were.
And that's how basketball worked. That's the only way it worked.
Except it has now changed dramatically. Because of Steph Curry, they were able to start focusing more on the three-point shot, because 3 points counts more than 2, and you only get 2 points for a dunk. So
now I know.
What the Warriors... It's a weird thing how numbers work like that.
Yeah.
But what they said is that we want to try and look at this from a stats perspective. Mm-hmm. How can we eke out the most three-point shots to win games in order to disrupt the way things work within the league? And, you know, we haven't used the word disruption in a while, much like things are happening around us. But what it did was it then put emphasis on shooting further away from the basket, which then meant that your bigger guys are starting to become a lot more obsolete, because the bigger you are, the slower you are, which means you can't necessarily guard or mark one of the shorter guys. Steph Curry is short in NBA terms. He's 6'3", which is my height.
And you're a sizable guy.
On average terms, yes. But, you know, when the average height of an NBA player is 6'8", you know, you can see. So, you know, there's always... Exactly. But once you start shooting three-pointers, it changed things absolutely. All of a sudden, they ran away with the league. They've won so many titles, and he's won these most valuable player awards that other teams then went and copied the same formula, not with the same success though. So you'll find that well, I guess it has to do with volume. Some people are saying, okay, fine. So what they did was they just played 3-point shooting. So that's what we're going to do. And then they just basically threw up 3-pointers. But the difference was they didn't focus on stuff like rebounding, defensive work, and the importance of how that works into that side of the game. A team that I'll mention who's done this is the Houston Rockets. They have one of the highest 3-point shooting percentages ever seen. They score and shoot more 3-pointers than most teams do. However, it hasn't won them championships because they've lost focus on the other aspects that are very important. So if any business tries to copy what somebody else does, and we've seen this, you can't replicate somebody else's formula in your business because you don't know what the underlying factors around the success are. Just the stuff you see, you think, okay, fine, must be this. But there is way more to it. It's about how you work as a team in order to get those shots, but also how you manage to stop the other guys from scoring against you. So if you're looking at it from a business perspective, as we are right now, let's say you want to take 3-point shots as a business.
You want to do the different. You want to disrupt. You want to break it up a little bit, change it up a little bit.
We're pivoting away from what we're doing. Don't just say, let's shoot for the stars and forget about what's going to happen once we do it. You have to say, how do we make sure that we look after what our core business strategy is in terms of what our earnings are. But when we do make this call to go in a direction, it doesn't kill us in the back end.
Correct.
And that's critically what teams like the Golden State Warriors have done, is that they've said, we're going all in this strategy. However, we also understand we have to look after this base element. That has also given them a type of longevity, because I think they made something like 4 of the last 6 NBA finals. In fact, the Cavaliers, where LeBron James played before, and the Golden State Warriors had epic battles. I think they had something like 3 or 4 showdowns in a row. LeBron won one of them, and the Warriors won the other 3. But it's been fascinating to see just how your strategizing can pay off if you go and look at things very, very meticulously. So to go back to perspicacity, there's a story that I tell in my talk, Leading the Winner's Circle, about a man named Richard. And I'll tell it the way I sort of do in the talk. Richard, in the 1970s, was sitting at home watching some tennis on TV. I think you might have heard me tell this story in the presentation before. But he's sitting around watching tennis on TV, and he stumbles upon women's tennis, sees a woman called Virginia Ruzicki playing, and suddenly realizes that, hang on, she's not that great. She's not flashy. She's not doing anything crazy, but she's winning games. He's got 2 daughters. So he thinks, maybe there's a chance they could go into playing tennis. So what he did was that after watching that tennis match on TV, he went to a room in his house, sat down and wrote a 78-page plan for his kids' success. Now, this guy had never played tennis professionally in his life. He'd never even played tennis long term. He actually ended up teaching himself tennis by buying books and what have you. When his eldest reached the age of 10, the whole family moved to Florida. She'd been scouted by a tennis coach. They moved to Florida, whole family from Los Angeles. So you can imagine that's across the entire United States. Family moves there, kids are in tennis academy. And then when they reach the age of about, I think for about 4 or 5 years, so they're about maybe 16, the eldest about 16 or so, he doesn't like what he's seeing. So can you imagine? So you've moved the entire family to Florida. They're there. They've been there for 4 years. Then he suddenly thinks his daughters are just not, getting any better. So he pulls them out of academy, and he teaches them himself. And it's incredible, because that was Richard Williams. Those are his daughters, are Venus and Serena. So at the age of 10, you move the family across to Florida. By the age of, I think, Serena was 18. No, sorry, I lied. She was 20. So he pulls them out of tennis academy in 2000. And no, I lie, in 1998. By 2000, Serena wins the US Open. Then the next year, Venus wins Wimbledon. And it also goes back to strategizing. That's what perspicacity is. Richard sat down, saw that there was an opportunity for his kids to do something. This is somebody who hasn't been a tennis scout, who hasn't had a past in the game, but saw what the critical elements of success were in just watching somebody play tennis. Can you imagine how shrewd that person is? And we often say, no, the intern's just sitting there making coffee. You cannot dismiss the insights people have.
Not anyone. So to wrap up, it has been fascinating. What I've learned so far from sport is exactly what I've learned and what I teach and speak about in business as well. Remain laser focused on being absolutely exceptional, even if it's not the way things are done. Stay connected, however, to why you are doing this, why this is important to me, and make sure you don't go it alone. Don't ignore anybody, whether they are the janitor or the CEO or the young or the old. Don't ignore anybody, and make sure you've got a support structure that can call you when you are riding high, but need to be more focused. Cyrus, it's been a pleasure as always. Thank you so very much. I look forward to our next chat that we will have in a short while, I'm sure, about movies this time. And I know you are very passionate about it. We should start at my favorite, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, and explore the concept of 42. It has been wonderful. Thank you very much, Cyrus.
Thanks so much.
Cheers.
Cheers.